Brian White has rejoined me yet again to talk about a subject that is intensely on your mind. I'm sure it's in the top 5 or 6 or 7 things that you think about every single day. Brian White, do you think about BYD every single day?
Probably every day.
And
Probably
BV,
every day.
and how does it compare to BVD?
I don't know what that is, so it's higher on the list.
BVD? You don't know BVDs? Come
I
on.
don't. The underwear?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't wear those.
Oh,
That particular brand. I do wear underwear since we're getting everything out there. The audience
but
needs to know,
transparency. We want transparency on this channel. All right.
but not for our underwear.
Elon Musk says that BYD, he believes that BYD is a fine company. They're a supplier to Tesla. We know that he has said, you and I have said, we need strong BEV players to help in the transition to a sustainable future. So shouldn't we all be super excited that BYD is doing so great and that they're making great cars and all that kind of stuff?
I think we should be. What I've seen, so I've made a number of videos about BYD in the past. Most recently, I was covering the $11,000 BYD Seagull that was imported for the purpose of benchmarking, tearing it down, trying to figure out what makes an EV $11,000. And in the comments, there was a lot of misunderstanding and anger. The first bit of misunderstanding was, well, that 11,000, it won't pass crash safety. It's going to be a death trap. But others pointed out, no, the Seagull has already been Euro NCAP tested and it passed. If you look at, well, those people must have been paid off. Well, they published the videos so you can go watch them on YouTube and you'll see different models of BYD and the crash safety scores. And forget the score itself. You can watch it and get a pretty, I mean, just watch how the head snap is on a particular collision, watch the deformation of the vehicle and draw your own conclusions. It's they pass. They are as safe as as just about anything else out there, certainly well within the mix. And then they say, yeah, but it's gonna die immediately because China makes junk. That's a misunderstanding. That's a 20-year-old notion that should have died with the first generation of iPhone. China is capable of building great things. They always have been. The problem they had, and when I lived and worked in China, this was 20 years ago, I kept telling people, as soon as China sorts out branding and IP protection, it's going to be over. Because the reason they weren't dominating at the time was there was no IP protection. So if you made a brilliant widget, somebody would open a factory making a knockoff of the brilliant widget and put your logo on it. And now both brands are worthless.
Right.
That's been protected. That is not a thing anymore. And they, well, yeah, but I saw this item on Amazon and 100 people are selling it. That's a different problem. That's a different issue completely. They know they have in-house engineering. Well, they steal everything. They take our stuff and copy it. Well, you understand that this car was imported to the US so we could take it apart and copy it, right? This is a normal business practice. And what we're seeing with BYD and all of the Chinese brands you can name is they've got the engineering in-house. They don't want to copy anyone. They want to do their own version better.
And now
And
I'll give you a little clap back on that.
sure,
I would say the Chinese today, based on my experience watching lots and lots of products in my industry and like the bicycle industry, et cetera, is that they are still inclined towards being less innovative. They're slightly more copy oriented than Americans who always have had the reputation for being the innovators. So I'm not saying that they don't do any innovation in China. I'm just saying their reputation is well deserved for being more of a copier.
I would agree with that to an extent. Cars are very complicated. And if they were just trying to do a cheaper knockoff, they would always be 5 years behind, 5 years behind. BYD, makes their own batteries, designs, develops their own. They're definitely not copying anyone there.
Yeah.
And they're I assume their BMS is entirely proprietary, because if their batteries are their own, their battery management system should be its own. A good example I saw, and I don't remember who told me this story, but they had made a Commodore 64 that fit inside a controller. And they designed it, they sent it over to China and said, don't change it, don't cut corners, copy it exactly. And they produced one and it didn't work. So they opened it up and took a look. And the first thing they had done was taken the board and folded it in half and changed just everything. And what they had done was taken this device that took probably $25 to make and made it for $5, except it didn't work.
Right.
And so the US engineer went through the circuit and found, if you change this transistor to this one, it'll work. And they're like, okay, so boom, they did it. And that is a good example of taking something good and making it a whole lot better and a whole lot cheaper while maintaining all the functionality, apart from that one transistor, which they got sorted out. So it was it's interesting to watch. So the idea that they're just making cheap, dangerous, deadly knockoffs that nobody would want is wrong. There are people who will not want the BYD Seagull because it is an economy car. But I don't know if you've driven a Chevy Bolt, it feels like the cheapest rental car you've ever had. And there's nothing wrong with that. For a lot of uses, it's great. I know a lot of people who don't drive on the highway. I know several people who don't drive on the highway. Good for them. They don't need 300, 400, 500 miles of range. 100 would be plenty. And cars like this would fill that need perfectly.
Yeah, and of course, this is not going to be an $11,000 car when it hits the United States. If it ever hits the United States, it'll
Correct.
be, people are estimating anywhere from 17 to 20,000 by the time you add on certain U.S. requirements and ship it and all this
Shipping, taxes, markup, all that. It's already available for sale in South America and I think Australia, but I'm not positive. And it's in the $18,000 to $23,000 range.
Right.
So it's still cheaper than the next gen Tesla compact. But I'm just going to tell you now, it's not as compelling as the next gen Tesla compact. I haven't seen it. I don't have that on any specific authority other than knowing anything about Tesla.
Right. So they are talking about the EVs, BYD rather, is talking about setting up a facility in Mexico. And their spokesperson came out the other day. She says, look, we admire Tesla and we only share about 15% of the market with Tesla. And I had people in the comments, I mentioned this the other day, and people in the comments were asking the question, what did they mean by they only share 15% of the market?
If you combine the two companies, that's about 4 million in production. The world market, if it's 60 million, then 4 million gets you right about there. So
I thought she was talking about overlap. I thought she was talking about.
No, I think she means the total automotive market.
Oh,
that if you add the two of them together, they're only 15% of the global market, of the global car market.
But if she was talking about the overlap, she doesn't sell anything in the US.
Oh, I see. Because you're right. 15% would be the wrong number. It'd be 15% of, and really it's 80 million. So they'd need to be at about 12 million to hit that. So I don't know. I would agree that, no, I wouldn't agree, because everything that Tesla makes, apart from the Cybertruck, has a BYD counterpart that's pretty close. But I would say that, they're still making up a small chunk of the market. Yeah, now, Shirley Lee, the CEO of BYD Americas, gave us some good information in that interview. First, she put to bed the rumors that they've already broken ground. I've heard so many people, nope, BYD already has a factory in Mexico and they're going to turn it on any day, or no, they've already started clearing the land. Well, unless she's lying, which is possible, they haven't selected the site just yet. Now, maybe they've selected it, but not moved forward. We don't know, but she said 124-mile radius around Mexico City. It's a pretty big area, but
yes,
but that is the area I would expect. Anywhere between there and north. She said it could even be south of Mexico City, which would be, they know what they're doing. I have confidence in them. And she was saying don't worry, we're not planning to enter the American market. Now, personally, I think that's election year rhetoric, so it doesn't wind up being campaign promises for both parties to have to double and triple down on banning BYD. But they don't have to enter the American market. They could be just loading the spring, getting everything lined up, making big waves in Central, South America, and Mexico. And then in 3 years or 5 years or whenever the time is actually right, then enter the American market. And they may even want to, at that time, placate the American market by saying, look, we're going to build a factory in the US.
Right.
So we will see. But the Americas division is a hemisphere. It's an entire hemisphere.
Right.
And they could also sell those cars into Canada and just bypass the US and say, look, if you don't want them, you don't get them. And I guarantee you there'll be a lot of people. There are enough people who cross the border into Canada on a regular basis who would eventually get annoyed and say, come on, man, why can't we have this car too?
Well,
So I think
in terms of a straight up competition between the two, I think everybody in the world would say, maybe you won't even agree, but I think you will. Tesla is the better manufacturer. They have the greater skill sets with regard to things like agile manufacturing, with regard to their proof of their ability to set up factories at very low cost, and their ability to go vertical and to create, brand new concepts with their own engineering and be years and years ahead of everybody else. So therefore, even if they went head to head out of Mexico, and even if they went head to head trying to sell them into the United States, it's pretty likely that Tesla will be able to compete head on head with BYD, probably giving a better value proposition.
it's tough to say. So BYD, I can't speak to their agility, but they seem to me to be far more agile than any of the legacy car companies. When it comes to the value proposition, Tesla definitely has some things figured out that BYD doesn't. Tesla sells made in China cars comparable to the BYD cars, both of them selling in Europe, and Tesla pulls the vastly higher margin. So the value proposition compared to the cost of goods sold is clearly better. BYD has the advantage that they get to make their own batteries. They're not paying a markup for batteries. Tesla is paying BYD a markup for the batteries in some of their cars. Now, it's a small markup, but it still hits the bottom line. The disadvantage there is that because BYD is the farmer who will only sell his own carrots and his own potatoes, is that sometimes you need other ingredients to make the stew. So you look at something like the U9 supercar. It's beautiful. It's going to be what, 230,000-ish, which for the performance you get is magnificent. But you also, because they're using LFP batteries instead of NCM batteries, lithium iron phosphate has a lower energy density. So you need a bigger battery pack to get the same performance. That two-door supercar weighs 3.5 tons. Not quite 3.5 tons. It's like 6,300 pounds. It's very expensive, very heavy for the type of car that it is. And there's just no way around it without getting someone else's batteries and putting them in. So you do get advantages, but you get disadvantages. LFP is still a chemistry with some room left to improve. How much, I don't know, but easily another 10% over 10 years, probably double that. So there's gains and losses in both ways. Do I think BYD poses a threat to Tesla? No more than I think Ford or GM poses a threat to each other. They can both be big, they can both succeed, and they can have overlap in customers, because sometimes because some people have different perceptions of what value is, and that alone can be enough. There are people who say, I've met some people who say, Teslas are great, I won't buy one because Daddy Bad Tweet said a thing I don't like. Yeah. They'll buy a BYD or a Mach-E or something else. And those cars can be good too. I don't dislike the Mach-E or the Lightning. I just think they'll be more successful when they get their cost controls in order and when the charging port is in the correct location to actually use superchargers.
So you've seen BYDs, I think, in person. You've had
I have.
conversations with people that have driven them. Your personal opinion about BYD vehicles right now?
So I got BYD had a booth, a big pop-up at Fully Charged in England. The cars look great. We got to get in them, check them out. They did some different things with the styling that they didn't have to do just to be different. So like the door compartment where you put a bunch of paper that you forget about had like elastic bungees on it instead of a sidewall, just to be different. So they had a lot of neat touches. The doors close nice. They feel solid. And the ones I've had the opportunity, and I think I've only been in one maybe, is that they look and drive fine. They are everything I expect an EV to be, everything I expect a car to be, of course, but also what I expect an EV to be. So initial quality is quite high. There are people in the comments on my video saying, well, I'd be worried it would die in 3 years. If it comes to the US, you need not worry. That is covered. That is the federal minimum warranty on batteries is that it has to have 70% of its life after 8 years or 100,000 miles.
Mm.
If it somehow doesn't, you get a new battery or they fix it. And the way batteries are designed today, it would be far more likely that they would just replace the battery, give you a whole new one, and then you're good for that much longer. And these companies are not going to sell a car that they know is going to need warranty repair. That is not a business any sane company expecting growth does, because it's just too expensive.
So do you think, I know we can't know, we can't get inside the brain of an Elon Musk or even of his team that makes these decisions. But do you think when they're up against BYD in China, let's say specifically in China, but it would then apply to other markets as well. And let's say that like last year when Tesla was lowering their prices, do you think it's about the competition and what they're selling their cars for? Or do you think it's really more about what they're hearing from consumers on a daily, weekly basis in terms of what they're willing to pay and how many of them are willing to pay that amount? I mean, do you think it's both? Do you think there's more of one or the other? What do you think?
So I think it is both and all of the above. There, if all the manufacturers could sell all the units at a cajillion dollars, all of them would continue to do so. No one would donate their profit just to be nice. What's going on is all of these manufacturers have units to move, and those who can afford to reduce based on their cost of goods sold have done so. And then it becomes a race to match the market with what you've got. So if BYD drops their price, Li Auto needs to drop their price or stop selling, because that's the whole reason we drop the price, is to bite into each other's market share, but also to increase the total market. And as all of them reduce the cost, it does expand the market. It does make it more people are able to afford the payments or just buy it outright, whichever it is for that particular buyer. And they would, have the opportunity to expand it that way. The losers in this price war are the small manufacturers who cannot turn a profit at the high price, let alone the low price. And it is for the small EV makers in China, it shall be a bloodbath over the next few years, because the prices are coming down. And if you're not moving 10 to 50,000 units a month, your costs of goods are not going to come down. Even if the market begins to slow and parts become cheaper, I'm not convinced that they would become cheaper quickly enough. And then you've got folks like BYD who are making their own batteries, who have a real opportunity to, you could look at it as BYD sells their cars at cost and their only margin is batteries. You could look at it that way and still be fairly accurate. And the competition does not have that luxury.
Okay, so let's go right back then to the $11,000 car, because this was a comment that came up in one of my videos the other day, and that was, will Tesla ever be interested in selling an $11,000 car, or is that too low a price to be interesting?
I would say it's too low of a price to be interesting. I think if they could, first of all, they want 20%. So that car's got to be 9 grand to build. If Tesla could build that car for 9 grand, why would they sell it when they could robo-taxi it?
Ah,
They could make 9 grand a year easily on that car. So why sell it? Why get 2 grand out of it when you could get 2 grand a month? So it would be, yeah, I don't see Tesla going quite that far down market. I could be wrong. I've been wrong about predictions like this one before. I didn't think that they would open up the supercharger network to other brands,
I understand.
but that was before the standards were before they won the charging standard wars. So everything is subject to change. But I personally don't see it. If they could build that car for 9,000, and I don't think they'd build a car that
Uh-huh.
basic.
Uh-huh.
I don't see a benefit to it. If they wanted to build something that wasn't particularly fast or fun, I think it would be larger and go in the boring tunnels and be a delivery vehicle,
There you go.
because it would. So I don't think that that's where Tesla's headed. What do you think, though? I'd be curious to hear that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that one of the issues, again, that happens when you have your company get bigger and bigger is not being interested in certain categories or certain product lines. So it could be a product line or it can be a price point. So at a certain point, if you're doing $500 billion a year, you're the largest company in the world in revenue, and you have an opportunity to sell a couple of million $11,000 cars a year, it might not seem that interesting compared to
And,
some other opportunities that are out there.
and we've seen that Tesla used to make Toyota's RAV4.
Yeah.
Tesla used to, was designed or maybe even made some of the electric Smart 42s. Uh, if I went to them today and said, "Look, I'm with whoever, and I'd like you to electrify 10,000 cars a year for me," you're
Right,
not getting a meeting. You're
right.
not even getting a meeting. So I can see that being legit. What I'd want to know in the comments, if I may hijack, uh, is what is the lowest price you think a Tesla will be sold for new? And I don't mean the base price. I mean the actual, like, go on the website and order it right now price. So because I've seen recently Model 3s that were demo cars selling, or inventory cars that sold for like $60 over 35 grand.
Wow.
So the current answer should be over 35,000, of course, but will it be 25? Will it be 24? Will it be 11? I'd be curious to see what the community thinks,
That
because
would be
there's wisdom in these viewers.
so much. Oh, the comments the last couple of weeks have been amazing. All
Yeah.
right, Brian, thank you so much, as always, for joining me on this situation. Yesterday, you and I had this great conversation. People may want to go back and take a look at that. We talked all about, what did we talk about? I think
The
we talked about
stock
the
price
stock
taking a
price.
little bit of a dip.
It was a big dip. It wasn't just a little dip. It was
No, it wasn't a skinny dip. It was more of a chunky dunk.
So if you're still interested in knowing what we thought about why the stock price went down yesterday, and this is now Tuesday, who knows? The stock might have rebounded by half of that or all of it. Who knows? But if you're interested in what we thought yesterday, here is the card right here. And other than that, Brian, thank you so much for coming on, as you commonly are well, maybe you want to do it. I don't know. I've never asked you if you
Felt
actually
different.
want to do this.
It's hostage situation.
That's a
Help me, you guys, help.
And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.